was always a bit of a rebel throughout my life, and the thought that I would be different from other people never bothered me. And when I heard that it bothered other people, it even gave me more impetus to continue training.
Born in November 1951, Mike Mentzer grew up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania with his younger brother, Ray Mentzer. Mike Mentzer would early discover his high level of intelligence in middle school, scoring a perfect A, which would later manifest towards his bodybuilding career. With finding inspiration in bodybuilding through a strength health magazine he came across as a kid, and his later studies of psychiatry, this combination would later turn Mike Mentzer into one of the most intellectual bodybuilders to ever live.
Contrary to what most bodybuilders do, which is train 2 to 4 hours a day, 7 days a week, to obtain that condition, I trained literally for 30 minutes 4 times a week, 2 hours a week.
With all this power and validation upon his intelligence, he created an unsatisfied side of Mike Mentzer. But with all this greed upon Arnold Schwarzenegger, this would be the finishing touch towards his tragic downfall.
He was an intellectual guy, the intellectual bodybuilder, the very smart bodybuilder. I'm like, wow, how great is this? If Mike would have just said, Arnold, congratulations, good job, next year would have been his, or the next year would have been his. In other words, he got upset and carried this bitterness and carried this anger with him everywhere he went.
Growing up in Pennsylvania, Mike Mentzer became one of the most smartest kids in his school, scoring perfect A's in his grades. Mike Mentzer would excel in his physical sports in school and always found favoritism in physical activity like push-ups, running, and playing sports, which would be the foundation for his love for bodybuilding.
That is, as you lift progressively heavier weights, the stresses on the body grow progressively greater too. Until finally, unless you do certain things like add extra rest days, the stresses will reach a critical point. They'll constitute overtraining.
One day as Mike Mentzer went to the store with his mother, he came across a bodybuilding strength health magazine and instantly caught a breath of fresh inspiration, and would be the day that Mike Mentzer gained uncontrollable interest for the bodybuilding genre. Mike Mentzer had then bought the magazine and rushed home just to read and learn about this so-called bodybuilding competition he wasn't familiar about at that time. Mike Mentzer's father had eventually bought him a pair of gym equipment after acknowledging his fresh passion for bodybuilding he had. Mike Mentzer would make a commitment to train as hard as possible and was introduced to John Myers by his dad, a famous powerlifter who taught Mike Mentzer the basis of strength training. Mike Mentzer would later be taken to his first bodybuilding show by John Myers and his father to watch the 1965 New York Mr. Olympia show. Mike Mentzer was absolutely amazed with what he saw on stage, witnessing the most aesthetic bodybuilder at the time, Larry Scott, the Mr. Olympia, who fueled ambition in Mike Mentzer to go further with bodybuilding. Mike Mentzer in his room and then took his Muscle Builder magazine, which showcased bodybuilders from the IFBB, and Mike Mentzer had wrote down the bucket list of the years he believed he would win the Mr. Olympia.
I can remember sitting down with Muscle Builder, because that was the IFBB magazine, and deciding to go to the IFBB at some point because that's where the Mr. Olympia was. I recall taking a pen and on one of the pages inside the Muscle magazine, writing down Mr. America, underneath that Mr. Universe, underneath that Mr. Olympia. And I had placed next to each of those titles, I wrote down the year that I planned on winning them. I may have been 14 at the time.
But this would be a spark of Mike Mentzer's disappointment, which later sent him down the rabbit hole. Mike Mentzer, in preparation for his upcoming shows to win and fulfill his purpose, he trained 3 hours a day for 6 days a week, in which he saw little to no progress. But this stagnation would eventually come to an end after meeting a man who would change the muscle building industry forever. Meet Arthur Jones. Arthur Jones was a smart individual who made various popular machines known today. Arthur Jones promoted the bodybuilding philosophy of high-intensity training, a training method of executing each rep with quality range of motion and time under tension. This way of training was frowned upon and was very niche, as bodybuilders at that era would deem Mike Mentzer's way of training to be useless. But as of today, with more back studies, high-intensity training is proven way more effective in muscle building, meaning Mike Mentzer was actually right at that time.
And he suggested I call his mentor, Arthur Jones. I do recall the first time I called him, he wasn't in. But he did call me back. The theory that he advanced back in the early 70s, the theory of high-intensity training, whose principles are that exercise has to be intense, brief, and infrequent, is universally valid.
There has previously never been a good method of training the low back. You do deadlifts with a barbell in the position of contraction. There is no force on those muscles, but there is compression force on the spine. If you've seen the low back machine, it maintains a resistance throughout the movement, and there is zero compression force on the spine, none.
But with this increase in size and muscle mass from his new approach to training, Mike Mentzer would experience his first downfall after the 1971 Mr. America show. Mike Mentzer would injure his right shoulder from doing sets of flat bench dumbbell flies, which set him off the gym for 8 months straight, which caused Mike Mentzer's depression, as he had nothing else to do since when the gym was the only hobby he had, leaving Mike Mentzer purposeless and out of shape.
I injured my right shoulder rather severely during a set of flat bench dumbbell flies. I could not train for almost 8 months after that. I couldn't raise my arm or my thigh. During that 8 months of inactivity, I became disheartened, a little bit depressed about it all. Didn't know how to direct my efforts elsewhere. Ended up getting not fat, but more overweight than I should have.
Getting back to the gym after 8 months of no training, Mike Mentzer completely destroyed the gym, training 3 days a week surprisingly, with highly intense workouts and implementing pause reps and time under tension, which played a huge role in Mike Mentzer's muscle density. Mike had later on went to compete to the 1974 Junior Mr. America and placed first, which was a living testimony towards his effective training approach, and later had Mike Mentzer meeting Joe Weider, who got Mike Mentzer into various interviews and photo shoots to cast Mike Mentzer on the Muscle Builder magazine, which was a dream come true to Mike Mentzer. Mike Mentzer was interviewed for his high-intensity training theory and documented in the magazine. In 1975 Mr. America contest, Mike Mentzer was not too confident in winning after seeing his competitors like Robbie Robinson.
Came out here actually expecting to win, but upon reaching backstage and seeing Robbie Robinson swallowing real hard, I realized that I was not going to win. I didn't take it hard either. Upon seeing Robbie, I just, well, whatever happened, happened. If I didn't win, I didn't really care about second or third. I knew Robbie was going to win, and he did very handily.
Mike Mentzer's 1975 America loss would be his fuel to destroy his body for the next Mr. America. Mike Mentzer showed way different results in the next show, with loads of size to a point even the judges didn't even recognize him because of his massive size, beating Roger Collard in the 1976 America, placing first. This Mr. America had Mike Mentzer emotional, thankful for how far he had came in the bodybuilding industry. With Mike Mentzer winning the Mr. America in North America, he would soon to find out the evil behind the IFBB.
Mike, I understand you're a medical student. Does this help and assist in the development and the understanding of the muscles?
Well, certainly a bodybuilder has to have a knowledge of all the muscles, but that's not why I chose medicine, no.
Did you get into the body development aspects of it because of medicine or vice versa?
Well, I got into bodybuilding, and that led to, of course, an intense interest in the body, and it developed, of course, into my present status as a student in medicine.
How many hours a day do you have to work to develop a physique like that?
Well, most bodybuilders train at least 3 hours a day, 6 days a week, but I only train a total of 3 hours a week.
Okay, what do you do during those hours?
Train very hard.
What type of training? Working mainly on weights?
Yeah, barbells, dumbbells, so forth.
What's the most you lift?
About 1,200 pounds.
Let's see you flex those muscles one more time. Just a nice close-up shot here for that arm development. Now let's see. Let's compare. No, I'll put mine behind you and you'll cover the whole thing.
With his first open competition at the IFBB against Robbie Robinson, he had placed third and saw how the corruption had placed in the IFBB. Realizing that Robbie's win being possible due to the sponsors and his contract deals with Ben Weider, and recognized how Ben didn't even hesitate to even acknowledge Mike Mentzer's existence. Mike knew he would have to do a lot of training to get ahead in the IFBB industry. Mike Mentzer competed in the 1977 Mr. Universe in France and has scored a perfect score of 300 at the prejudging, but was eventually disregarded. The weight was just unrealistic, too perfect, and the bodybuilders were judged based on a placement system, which Mike Mentzer had placed second and was, I guess, his first robbery. This show was seen as a robbery to Mike Mentzer, as the judges most definitely knew that Mike Mentzer had the good genetic insertions, the good muscle bellies, the good results, but just saw that his results were too good to be true, that they just deemed to make Mike Mentzer place second that day.
But even that didn't bother me so bad. I've never taken defeat that bad. Cal was very, very good shape, where I was definitely off, not quite at my peak. I've never been devastated by a defeat. I don't view defeat as failure. It's just one step in the learning process.
The following season, Mike Mentzer had competed in the Mr. Universe hosted in Acapulco. I don't know how to pronounce this thing, but it was hosted in Mexico. And Mike Mentzer scored another 300 perfect score, being the only bodybuilder to ever hit such a level of scoring in the history of IFBB. This was a trait that Mike Mentzer had picked up as a kid, as he would score perfect scores in his grades. Mike Mentzer knew that his intellectual and smart training and Arnold not competing in that year, Mike Mentzer knew he would most definitely win the Mr. Olympia 1980. The day before the 1980 Mr. Olympia, Mike Mentzer would become extremely furious after Arnold Schwarzenegger had mentioned his comeback to the Mr. Olympia. Mike was absolutely angry, and he saw it as an unfair way of competition, that others get to make their Mr. Olympia participation known, while Arnold just shows up whenever it feels like it and just competes. Mentzer knew a big part of what Arnold did was because of the political standpoint of the IFBB, and Mike Mentzer never liked people who broke the rules. Mike Mentzer had called out Arnold backstage with verbal insults to one another, but who will win the fight will be determined by who wins the Mr. Olympia 1980.
I remember Arnold said something about Mike's stomach. Arnold said, "Hey, you have a fat stomach anyhow." And Mike's like this. I'm like, "Oh my God!" And I don't know how it came down. Because Mike may have provocated that. It's been 35 years. I forget exactly. Okay.
He was making a fool out of himself, but at that time I wasn't concerned. I thought it was weird, but didn't want to defend himself. That was his business. So he was going through his antics. At one point, Boyer Co. stood up as a gentleman and said, "Look, why don't we just let Arnold explain to all of us right here, right now, what his reasons are for wanting to have weight classes. Maybe we can get to the bottom of this instead of arguing aimlessly." And he did say it in a very gentlemanly fashion. There was no hint of malice or anything negative in his voice. And Arnold snapped back, "Oh, Boyer, why don't you stop acting like a baby? Grow up and be a man," which I thought was uncalled for. So I said, "Look, Boyer Co. said that as a gentleman," something to that effect. "He doesn't deserve that." And that pissed him off. He turned around very rapidly to face me, and he literally had his upper lip was furled around he was snarling like an animal. He said, "Oh, come on, Mentzer, we all know that you lost last year because of your big belly." And I allowed that to irritate me perhaps too much, and on impulse I ran over towards him. I was surprised. Arnold Schwarzenegger sat down. I scared him. He went over and sat in the corner, and when he went to sit down, I continued at him. I was wagging my finger at him, telling him that his behavior was reprehensible, that it was not Boyer Co. who needed to grow up, but him. And he couldn't look me in the eye. He literally went from being frantic, hysterical adolescent to shrinking away like an injured child.
Mike Mentzer was looking crispy dry, the best he's ever looked. And with him easily scoring perfect scores and posing, he was determined to beat Arnold Schwarzenegger in the Mr. Olympia 1980. But Schwarzenegger had some downsides. His abs were lacking, his quads were lacking, a little definition. Arnold had eventually won the 1980 Mr. Olympia, and Mike Mentzer had his dreams crushed. This was a lifetime robbery, and Mike Mentzer called Arnold winning because of his connections with judges and various brand promotions. Since Arnold was affiliated with Hollywood Industries, which gave him the upper hand to win the IFBB.
As I was. I thought that evil was something you just read about in novels and newspapers, when in fact evil is something that's around all of us. This brought it all into focus, and I didn't want to be involved or associated with people like that, and decided to drop out. There was a rift after the 80 Olympia. Actually, it wasn't so much Joe as Ben. There was one time when I was in the ombudsman, a phone call came in from Ben Wisher for me. During the course of the conversation, I can remember yelling at Ben. He was not appreciating some of the things that I was saying about the IFBB with regard to the 80 Olympia. And I remember Joe grabbed the phone. Why are you yelling at my brother like that?
Bye, have a great time.
Bro, what's wrong with him? Something wrong with this nigga, bro.